Riddle me this. What is Batman Hush? A better question would be, how is Batman Hush? How is it one of the best Batman comics ever and at the same time one of the worst? Batman Hush is like the pineapple on pizza of Batman comics because nobody can agree about it. From online reviews to YouTube videos, Reddit, Twitter, and even my own YouTube comment. Opinions about Hush are always divided between great and overrated. And it always comes down to the age-old discussion of good art versus bad plot, which quite frankly has been done to death and it misses the bigger picture. Because the art and the story are one thing, but how the success and failure of Hush affected the Batman comics is rarely discussed. The real mystery of the story is how it can be so polarizing and still remain so popular. A mystery hidden in plain sight that I will now try to unravel, diving deep into the story in order to understand what Hush did to Batman. The 90s was one of the most successful decades for Batman, but the popularity of the character started to decline in the early 2000s, when the Batman comics fell into a creative slump that resulted in mediocre stories with forgettable plots and lousy art. Most of this happened because of a problematic editorial transition, which I already covered in a previous video. Once that transition was over, DC Comics realized that Batman needed a comeback, and in order to bring back some of the success of the 90s, they hired two of the most successful creators of that decade. The first of them was writer Jeph Loeb, who was already popular among Batman fans because of his iconic stories from the 90s, especially The Long Halloween, which is still one of the most influential Batman comics of all time. And even though Jeph Loeb's name alone was enough to get Batman fans interested, DC Comics wouldn't be satisfied until they got the attention of the entire comic book fandom, and so they hired the only artist who could do that. Jim Lee was one of the superstar artists of the 90s, co-creator of the best-selling comic book of all time and co-founder of Image Comics. In the early 90s, Jim Lee was all over the place, but after founding Image, he never had another run in a mainstream superhero comic book. However, Jim Lee always wanted to do Batman, and thanks to a friendly bet with a DC executive, he became the monthly Batman artist in 2002, partially just to prove that he could still do it. The first Jim Lee Batman cover reveals that Jeph Loeb and Jim Lee, or as I like to call them JLJL, had started working on this project as far back as 2001. The project started out as an epic year-long mystery, just like The Long Halloween and Dark Victory, but this time published across 12 chapters of the monthly Batman comic. However, DC Comics kept the project a secret, never actually announcing it until the very last minute, and always calling it Hush as an inside joke, which then became the story's final title. With all the pieces in place, JLJL started working on this ambitious project, but there was one big caveat. DC Comics told Jeph Loeb that the story needed to introduce the new big Batman enemy, something that eventually proved to be a fatal mistake. After many months of hard work, the first chapter of Hush came in the fall of 2002, when Batman number 608 was published, and it changed everything. There was no doubt about it. Batman was back. The cover featured a new logo, one that resembled the iconic Batman logos of the past, the logos that had been missing since 1986. It was a return to form, with the art of Jim Lee setting a new standard for Batman. It didn't really matter that the cover was actually a remake of an earlier Jim Lee black and white story, because for the first time since the new millennium started, Batman looked right. The excitement for the new Batman storyline was off the charts, and this issue quickly sold out, going into a second printing, which featured an even more iconic and this time brand new cover. The story wastes no time, as it starts with Batman fighting mercenaries in the dark, using a never-seen-before vision mode that provides Batman with more than just night vision. This was the first time something like the detective mode from the Arkham series was ever seen in the comics. Barely one page into the story and Hush already introduced new elements to the Batman mythos. Then the first splash page of the story introduces Jim Lee's Batman in action and fulfills the dreams of the entire Batman fanbase. Ever since Jim Lee became one of the most popular comic artists of the 90s, Batman fans wondered what a Batman story would look like if it was illustrated by Jim Lee. However, the Batman comics of that decade made a conscious effort to avoid this kind of art, and Jim Lee only made a couple of Batman pinups and a short black and white story. The closest thing to a fully developed Batman story with Jim Lee's style was this weird and obscure 1999 crossover with a character called The Darkness, which was illustrated by Mark Silvestri, whose style is quite similar to that of Lee. It wasn't until Hush was published in 2002 that fans could finally enjoy Jim Lee's Batman, which quickly became a fan favorite and cemented the legacy of Jim Lee as one of the all-time great Batman artists. His Batman has large muscles, short ears, and a big chest, all of which is reminiscent of the Batman of Dick Sprang. The dark and grim disposition of Lee's Batman is also straight out of Frank Miller's Batman, while the athletic body and movements combined with a large, flowing cape that shrouds him in darkness is reminiscent of the Batman of Neil Adams and Norm Breyfogle. In other words, Jim Lee took some of the best Batman designs and combined them with his unique style to create what is quite possibly the most definitive comic book Batman, and his first real challenge is overcoming Killer Croc, who now looks like a mini version of the 90s Godzilla. This is the first time Killer Croc looks more lizard than human, and it's also the first time he comes up with a complex kidnapping scheme to get some ransom money. This crime is not typical for Croc, and as he and Batman fight, a mysterious character steals the money. Someone who is actually not that mysterious when we take a closer look at a tiny shadow in the big splash page, hiding the answer to this little mystery in plain sight. And this right here is the theme of the story, introduced already in the opening sequence. Hush is all about giving the readers the obvious answers, but hiding them in plain sight. Obvious answers, such as the fact that Catwoman is a thief. This is Catwoman's first appearance in the Batman comics since she was updated and modernized 1 year earlier in her new comic book series, the same series where Batman first encountered her after she returned to Gotham. But Hush ignores all of that, as Batman still acts as if this is his first time seeing Catwoman back in Gotham, and continuity be damned. Now, Catwoman might be a thief, but this crime is also not typical for her. After a lengthy chase across rooftops, Catwoman eventually loses Batman and returns to Poison Ivy, who was manipulating Catwoman all along. This revelation, however, shouldn't come as a surprise, because if we had looked closely at Catwoman during the chase, we would have been able to notice Ivy's leaves on her wrist, once again hiding the answer in plain sight. The theme of Hush consistently executed throughout the first chapter, with a remarkable attention to detail that demands our attention. Chapter 1 raises a lot of questions and creates an even more intriguing mystery when Batman's Batrope is suddenly caught by someone off-panel, and Batman falls down to Crime Alley, landing very badly among a group of unfriendly thugs who all try to unmask Batman and instead activate the security measures of the Batsuit. This is the kind of imaginative comic book fun that adds flavor, color, and joy to the opening of Chapter 2, where Batman is rescued by the Huntress, but not just any Huntress. This is the first appearance of the brand new Huntress outfit and motorcycle, and in true Jim Lee's 90s fashion, it's a sexier and more revealing outfit, exposing much of her once protected skin and carrying pouches. Lots of pouches. It's awfully impractical and it looks great. It's also a nice throwback to the original Huntress, but there's no explanation about this change, and after saving Batman, Huntress disappears for the time being. Now, there was a mysterious guy watching everything, showing nothing more than a brown trenchcoat and a fully bandaged head. Sometime later, Batman is taken to the Batcave, where Alfred realizes Bruce has a fractured skull and he needs to go to the hospital. Alfred and Oracle immediately think of Chandra, the doctor who cured Batman's broken back in Nightfall, the same doctor whose mind was damaged beyond repair. That doctor apparently got better, according to this story, with no other explanation than this throwaway dialogue. Now, isn't it weird how they bring back a broken character from the past, somehow they fix her and then completely gloss over that? I think they really wanted to bring her back, but they couldn't, because despite his fractured skull, Bruce manages to tap his finger in Morse code and tells Alfred to call Thomas Elliot, who is not only a brilliant doctor but also Bruce's first and only childhood friend, who up until this point didn't exist. Thomas Elliot is introduced through flashbacks, beautifully illustrated in monochromatic watercolors that adds texture to these forgotten and, until recently, non-existent memories. However, there's something odd about young Tommy Elliot. His words, his attitude, his demeanor are all shady as fuck, turning him into the prime suspect of being the mysterious new enemy, as both of them show up in the same chapter. It couldn't possibly be more obvious and more consistent with Hush's theme, which is one of the reasons why the story fails. If the mystery can be so easily solved in Chapter 2, then there's no mystery at all, except for the mystery of how Hush manages to hook us back in even after spoiling the entire mystery. The way they do it is by deflecting attention away from the obvious flaws and moving the story in other directions, like Batman allowing Killer Croc to escape from Arkham Asylum in order to follow him and find out why he wanted the ransom money. Chapter 3 also showcases more shady moments of Thomas Elliot that further make him the main suspect, while also providing more flashbacks to his childhood, where it is revealed that his parents had been in a car accident, and Bruce's father managed to save Elliot's mother, but not his father, turning Elliot into a similar tragic kid. And speaking of car accident, someone shoots the Batmobile tire and causes Batman to crash the car off the road. Another obvious connection between Elliot and the mysterious new enemy. The question is, how is he getting the inside information to successfully attack Batman? Now that's a riddle. An enigma that doesn't draw attention to itself, because it's Jim Lee who draws all the attention, as he draws all the action in the most spectacular way possible. Batman arrives just in time to fight Killer Croc and save Catwoman, as both of them had been set up by Poison Ivy. The fight is fantastic and pure eye candy. The costumes, the gadgets, the small circular panels combined with a large action moment create this frantic pacing that conveys the chaos of the moment. It's Jim Lee working in perfect harmony with inker Scott Williams and colorist Alex Sinclair to create the most exciting Batman reading experience of the early 2000s. After a lengthy battle, Killer Croc tells Batman he wanted the money to revert his new mutation, and looking at the monster Croc had become, Batman sees himself, and he starts to wonder if he has turned into the fearful monster that he has always pretended to be, a monster unable to show love or being loved, a monster alone. And as these fears and insecurities hound Batman's mind, Catwoman approaches him with information about Ivy. Catwoman wants payback, but she also wants to thank Batman for saving her, and she kisses the Dark Knight, who quickly gives in and embraces her in perhaps the most iconic image in a story that is full of them. This is the splash page that so many people love and adore, Batman and Catwoman on the rooftops of Gotham, kissing in the pale moonlight. It's beautiful. It's romantic, and it's weird, because even though Batman is literally embracing the moment, he's not doing it out of passion or desire. Batman is acting out of fear. Fear of being a monster. Fear of being alone. Batman is not in his right mind here, but who is winning love? Now, this moment is also another display of disconnected continuity, because at the same time as this happened, Catwoman was having a romantic affair with Detective Islam Bradley in her own comic book series, a very minor detail that nobody likes to talk about because it makes Catwoman look bad and it breaks the illusion, the idea of Batman and Catwoman as a happy couple. And as a couple, they follow the trail of Poison Ivy all the way to Metropolis, where Bruce also runs into Shoehorn Elliot. These extremely convenient appearances and the shady flashbacks turn Elliot into the obvious candidate for being the bad guy. Everyone and their parents knew this, except for Bruce, because not only he doesn't have parents, but he's also clearly not thinking straight, as the only thing in his mind is the kiss with Catwoman. It's Batman becoming a bit more human. It's Batman allowing himself to feel emotions. It's Batman acting like a love-struck teenager who just got his first kiss, showing zero emotional maturity and becoming distracted and less effective. Emotionally, this is not a good Batman, but visually, he's one of the best. Chapter 4 is also a nice showcase of the popular characters of Metropolis. There's Lois Lane, Clark Kent, Perry White, and Talia? Oh, that's right. She abandoned her father and became the new CEO of LexCorp, something that happened recently in the Superman comics. And the only reason why this continuity is actually respected is because those comics were also written by Jeff Loeb. However, Talia is barely in this chapter, and the whole storyline starts to feel as nothing more than a checklist of characters from the Batman mythos. The next character is Poison Ivy, who has to fight an angry Catwoman, as the pussycat gets tired of beating around the bush and starts beating the bush. Once again, the fight is beautifully illustrated, and when Ivy turns the tables on Selina, Batman shows up to do some weed-whacking, forcing Ivy to summon the Super Simp, which surprises nobody considering how the story takes place in Metropolis. And so Hush keeps making the most obvious and predictable choices, while still keeping us engaged. The real power of the story is being too simple and is still making us want to turn the pages to see what happens next. And everybody wanted to see what happened next. It's Batman vs Superman in Chapter 5, announced front and center in the cover of Batman number 612, which also sold out and went into a second printing, with the cover featuring the pencil art of the original. And it makes sense. People love the idea of this fight. It's like the wet dream of the average superhero fan and mediocre filmmakers. And lucky for them, the fight is long. It's fast, it's exciting. It's an updated version of The Dark Knight Returns, as Batman uses kryptonite, flash grenades, hypersonics and electricity all over again. It is also very similar to World's Finest 3, the 1986 story where Poison Ivy turns Superboy into a simp, and Robin has to use the kryptonite ring to break the spell. The similarities are uncanny, down to the iconic splash page of Batman punching Superman. The fight only ends when Superman remembers he's actually married and he can't go simping after hot redheads anymore, so he works with Batman to capture Ivy in some of the best illustrations of the entire story. Jim Lee's art in this chapter is gorgeous, but so are the colors by Alex Sinclair, who makes Metropolis look like the bright, hopeful city that Batman wishes Gotham would be. Even at night Metropolis is bright. Hell, even the sewers are nice here. I bet Metropolis smells really nice too, which makes things easier for Krypto to fly high on weed and lead the heroes straight to the dealer, where Catwoman finally gets to do some hand-to-face gardening. This is how the chapter comes to an end, and it's hard to describe it. On one hand, it's awesome, it's beautiful, but it's also pointless. This chapter was a total distraction. It's filler that doesn't develop the main mystery in any significant way, and it was mostly fan service to showcase the friendship between Batman and Superman. In the end, even with Ivy captured, Batman is just as in the dark about the mystery as when it all started. Chapter 6 then moves back to Gotham, where Bruce gets together with Elliot, Selina and Leslie to go to the opera, and the word hush appears for the first time in the story, as Elliot tells Bruce and Selina to be quiet or he would separate them. It's a brilliant piece of dialogue that foreshadows a controversial ending. Bruce also brings up a lot of connections between opera, his parents and Elliot's parents. He also brings up how his relationship with Catwoman resembles an opera. The story really tries to give a symbolic meaning to this night at the opera, but unfortunately this narration is only distracting and somewhat pointless, almost as if it was written by the opera clown, or in this case the clown girl. Harley Quinn takes over the opera stage and her chaotic energy seeps into the art as the pages change the square and traditional layout to a more playful arrangement of panels that reflects Harley's zaniness. Harley then steals Elliot's jade pendant, and as the story slowly becomes more confusing with each new villain, the art keeps doing all the heavy lifting with one glorious splash page, reminding us why we are actually enjoying this. The Batman of the opera makes his entrance and Harley decides to improvise, getting ready to kill Batman. At this point, it's clear that all the enemies are following a master plan, but Harley is unpredictable and she would have ruined everything if it wasn't for Catwoman, who shows up in time to save the plan. Catwoman and Harley engage in a battle of graceful acrobatics, skin-tight costumes and witty remarks, until Harley shoots Catwoman and the falling cat is saved by the Bat. The crowd goes wild and the clown goes out, through the backstage door, followed closely by Elliot. Batman rushes after them, but he wasn't fast enough, because the story pulls the biggest rock from under our feet, as someone pulls the trigger that ends the life of Thomas Elliot. This turn of events is dramatic. It's operatic. It's the halfway point of the story, and the main suspect of being the new enemy is no more. The plot has taken an unexpected turn, as the Joker returns to the Batman comics for the first time since No Man's Land to compromise Batman's integrity. Chapter 7 of Hush was published in Batman number 614, and in my opinion, it's the greatest moment of the story, featuring one of the most striking Batman covers of all time, with Joker's face upside down in all his vicious madness and horrible detail as Batman strangles him. The words punchline could be a reference to the end of a Killing Joke, or maybe just the fact that Joker's face gets punched a lot. Batman goes on a blind rage and beats the Joker mercilessly, recalling his most atrocious acts of violence: the Killing Joke, No Man's Land, a death in the family, watercolor flashbacks drenched in red and black, just like the rage that fills Batman with hatred for the man who has caused so much pain to him and Gotham without consequences. A brilliant sequence that justifies this violent reaction and contextualizes it as a brief overview of the Joker's greatest hits, which now also includes the death of Thomas Elliot. Batman feels responsible for this tragedy because his inaction allowed this madman to continue on his rampage instead of ending him once and for all. It's the age-old dilemma of why Batman doesn't kill the Joker all over again, but this time it's different. As Batman thinks of Barbara, he gets really tempted to recreate the Dark Knight Returns scene from the Tunnel of Love, because Barbara was the first, the best Batgirl. The only Batgirl according to this story. It's a beautiful homage to Batgirl, to Oracle, one of the greatest characters of the Batman mythos. Thinking of Barbara, Batman gets ready to kill the Joker. Catwoman tries to stop him, but Batman takes her out quickly, fearing that if he doesn't kill the Joker now, she will become his next victim. This is one of the most emotional, raw and visceral Batman comics ever, as the painful images of Batman's tragic failures come back to haunt him in colorless flashbacks that make him more determined for what he is about to do. A storm has been unleashed in Gotham, with rain that keeps pouring down over Batman, the tears of a city that weeps for its hero who is about to cross the line that he vowed never to cross. There is a tragedy about to unfold, and Gotham raises its voice in protest with loud thunder and lightning. But Batman is deaf and blind with rage and grief, and he doesn't even listen when the Joker says he is innocent. In a dirty alley with the walls covered in graffiti full of names of iconic Batman creators from the past as the only witnesses, Batman will finally kill the Joker. But he doesn't. Thanks to James Gordon, who at this point was no longer commissioner and was rarely ever seen in the comics anymore, but who appears just when his oldest friend needed him the most. Once again, Gordon becomes the anchor that keeps Batman grounded, reminding him that they do things by the book, and as the rain creates ripples in the puddle of water, this becomes the punchline to the Killing Joke. This is undeniably one of the best Batman comics ever, as it manages to explain why Batman doesn't kill the Joker in the most perfect way possible. It's all about Batman's integrity and his trust in people, trust in his fellow men to do the right thing, setting the example of how it is done. It's a hard concept to grasp but masterfully executed, reinforcing Batman's heroic qualities that make him mythical. The real punchline, however, is that the Joker is innocent, which is confirmed by the mysterious new enemy, who was watching everything and is now using Two-Face's coin. Joker is innocent, meaning he didn't kill Elliot, or meaning Elliot is not dead. Two possible meanings, two sides of the same coin, meaning of course that the new enemy is Two-Face, or is he? See, at this point the mystery starts to become increasingly confusing because we are no longer certain that the story is following the theme of hiding the answers in plain sight, so from this point onwards it all becomes a guessing game. The story then takes it slow, first giving us room to breathe at Elliot's funeral and then moving to the Batcave, where Batman uses holographic technology for the first time ever, to finally do some proper detective work, realizing that there's a criminal mastermind pulling the strings behind the scenes. He just doesn't know who is it yet, even though the answer might be there, hidden in plain sight. Chapter 8 is also a showcase of Nightwing, as he provides moral support for Bruce and the story provides background about the first Boy Wonder. Batman and Nightwing then tackle the streets of Gotham, and Jim Lee rewards us with a majestic gallery of popular Batmobiles from the movies, which would have been more impressive if they were comic book Batmobiles. The original dynamic duo is back in action, and they make quick work of the Riddler, who is completely out of place in the grand scheme of things, sticking out like a sore thumb with his maniacal crimes that don't fit the pattern of the evil master plan. The Riddler is too obviously different, and obvious is the theme of Hush. Therefore, the Riddler is the answer. Easy to say in hindsight, but hard to guess the first time, because as a proper detective, Batman finds another clue, a red herring, one that points him to the only enemy that calls him detective. Before doing that, however, the story has to make one major development, when Batman decides to reveal his identity to Catwoman. At the same time, Two-Face reveals his full face to the Joker, who is finally back in Arkham after spending years locked away in the Slab, a metahuman prison in the South Pole. This was a very dumb continuity development that Hush thankfully corrected simply by ignoring it, just like it also ignored Dead Reckoning, the Two-Face story happening at the same time in Detective Comics, where Harvey Dent is still Two-Face. Unfortunately, this whole plot point with the Joker and Harvey full-face Dent doesn't lead anywhere at all, making it truly pointless as the story starts to go on a downward spiral of poor storytelling choices. Take Ra's al Ghul for instance, a character who shows up in Chapter 9, joining the story in the most convoluted and unnecessary way imaginable. Jeff Loeb's commitment to showcase the most important relationships in the Batman mythos is commendable, but at this point he's doing it at the expense of storytelling. First, Batman kidnaps Talia, then he confronts Rage in an epic sword fight in the desert, and all with the intention of showcasing one of the most classical moments between these characters. Despite how trite and forced this moment is, the fight is not devoid of purpose, as it not only showcases the great art of Jim Lee once again, but it also presents a change in Batman, as he acts more emotional, hot-headed, stabbing Rage in the fight to get some answers, while also becoming more sentimental, thanks to Catwoman. Even though these changes look like character growth and development, they are actually not, because as Ra's al Ghul explains, Batman is changing as a result of masterful manipulation. Whoever is behind it all, they are making sure Batman thinks less and feels more, which gets us nowhere with this punk-ass mystery, as Batman barely solves anything or finds the answers to nothing, except that someone used the Lazarus Pit. Meanwhile, Baldy Dent reveals the truth about the conspiracy to James Gordon, and when Batman returns to Gotham, he finds out Lady Shiva has whipped Catwoman, and then he gets a big kiss from Talia, because she is, and always has been, that bitch. However, Catwoman is quickly back on her feet thanks to Alfred, as Batman has decided to bring her into the Batcave, bringing her closer to home as the home stretch of the storyline begins in Chapter 10. Now more than ever, the devil is in the details, because it's only through the details that we will make sense of the most controversial part of the story. Details like the powerful cover of Batman number 617, with Batman kneeling down on an open grave, foreshadowing the biggest moment of the story. Details like all the opening double-page spreads of each chapter featuring a panel layout that forms the letter H. Details that show the level of care and attention that went into the visual composition of the story. Details like the reflection of Harley Quinn in Joker's eye, announcing her attack in Chapter 7, or a tiny shadow in a corner of the Batcave, announcing Robin's entrance in Chapter 10, where the Boy Wonder and Catwoman get into a fight that has to be stopped by Batman. A fight that was actually staged by the dynamic duo to drive Catwoman out of the Batcave, even though she was just brought in. It's a very confusing plot point, and we better get used to that, because from here on out, those only become more frequent. I can't stay mad, however, seeing how they decided to bring back the old memorabilia from the Batcave, which had disappeared since No Man's Land. Most importantly, the predominant presence of Jason Todd's empty Robin outfit, contrasting with Tim Drake's presence, a showcase of the history of Robin and a telltale sign of things to come. The devil is in the details. Like when Huntress knew exactly where Batman was going to fall way back in Chapter 2, and she was the first one there. That was not a coincidence, as Huntress reveals to Catwoman that it's all been part of a plan against Batman, and she was a part of it by accident, joining this evil scheme in exchange for a new bike and a skimpy outfit. The Huntress has never looked so good, and at the same time so bad. This is the dichotomy of Hush, a story that keeps Batman distracted with convenient plot points and confusing characterizations, while Jim Lee keeps us distracted with phenomenal art, great visuals and glorious splash pages, like when Huntress fights Catwoman, but she's really fighting another woman, the person she was before. The Huntress that was ignored, the avatar of her guilty conscience, the worst fear in her subconscious. This is the Huntress's biggest shame, and Batman now has a name for the person behind this game. It's the man who wants fear to reign, and his name is Jonathan Crane. The Scarecrow joins the rotating cast of characters of Hush, and this time around, Jim Lee's art is not that lush. The Scarecrow doesn't look half as good as the rest of the characters, but he does bring many revelations. The Huntress was under the influence of his fear gas, which surprisingly doesn't work on Batman, probably because he was under another influence already, as the Scarecrow points out. Batman also deduces that Crane must be responsible for manipulating the others, which was a nice theory that got me thinking about what they could have offered each of the villains to join the plan. However, that thought will have to wait, because Batman has been led to a graveyard, one that holds a dark secret, which is revealed when the new enemy finally confronts Batman, holding Robin as a hostage. Everything has been leading up to this moment, this final revelation when everything makes sense. The final piece of the puzzle falls in place as the new villain takes off his bandages and reveals not Harvey Dent, but Jason Todd back from the dead and standing on his own empty grave. This splash page is hauntingly iconic because after 15 years of history, Jason Todd is back in one of the most shit-your-pants moments ever created in the history of Batman. This became the best comic book moment of 2003, as Batman fans witnessed the return of Jason Todd and the revival of one of Batman's darkest chapters. A moment that would never have been possible with the previous creative teams. A moment that turns out is not actually that great, because as Batman fights Jason in chapter 11, things start to feel a bit odd. The fight is emotional, it's raw, it's visceral, but Batman is not convinced that this is actually Jason, as he brings up the Purloin Letter and calls it the first detective story, and that's just plain wrong. The first one is actually Murders in the Rue Morgue, and the real Jason would have known that. Probably. But this Jason brings up the Purloin Letter because in that story, the answer was hidden in plain sight, just like Jason's attack on Batman in this story. It honestly made perfect sense, until Jason starts melting and it's revealed that it was Clayface all along. For the first time ever, Clayface becomes a decoy, impersonating a popular character to create a plot twist, which has now become a classic trope for the character. It's just a shame that it had to happen as this major disappointment that effectively ruined the story, because absolutely nothing they could come up with next could surpass that revelation. Jason Todd was actually perfect, making the mystery work so well on so many levels that I actually think this was Jeff Loeb's original idea. This was the perfect story to bring Jason back, but they couldn't, because Jeff Loeb had agreed to create a brand new enemy, turning a great revelation into a disappointing fake-out, and shooting themselves in the foot as Clayface just doesn't make any sense. It was so bad that the story had to be retconned a couple of years later to actually make this the real Jason, at least in the first part of the fight. This is a great example of how one simple decision can completely ruin a story, and for Hush there was no coming back, as everything that comes afterwards is a complete asspull. Like when Batman and Oracle find a mysterious device hidden in the Batcomputer that created hypnotic suggestions and which leads them to Harold, the trusty mute hunchback that used to create gadgets for Batman. Harold was introduced back in the early 90s, and he disappeared completely from the Batman comics after the Batcave was destroyed in Cataclysm. Harold never returned to the Batcave, but he was still a supporting character in the Azrael comics, where he was still mute and a hunchback. The Azrael comics ended right in the middle of Hush, and Harold was never seen or mentioned again. Until now, when he returns like an RKO and somehow he's been fixed. He can walk straight and talk now, but he can't say much anyways, as the real Hush shoots him in the face and the final chapter begins. Even though Jim Lee still delivers vibrant and dynamic illustrations, worthy of the most mythical Batman comics, the final chapter is one giant disappointment, and not even the 4 different variant covers are enough to save it. The reveal of Hush's true identity is anticlimactic, as Thomas Elliot returns and confirms what everybody knew since the beginning. However, it's even worse now that his motivations are explained, and it becomes obvious the character was forced into the story. A pathetic excuse for a character that got his name from an inside joke and with one of the lamest motivations ever, as all he wants is revenge born out of a childhood grudge. It's a terribly awful execution, because if it's all about childhood grudges against Bruce Wayne, then Black Mask is the better villain. Even worse is how Batman doesn't get to be the hero and stop the bad guy. Batman is outmatched and Hush is defeated by Dent, who although got his face restored by Elliot, is still a double-crossing bastard. Naturally, Hush falls to the river and his body is not found. Instead, Bruce finds a microchip hidden in his brain, and combined with the subliminal messages from Harold's device, it explains why he was acting emotional, unfocused, and why Scarecrow's toxin didn't work on him. Now there's only one mystery left, and the person with the answers is the guy with all the questions. The final revelation happens inside Arkham Asylum, as the Riddler explains in detail how the plan came together, with one big exposition dump that shows just how awful of a mystery everything was, as nobody could ever figure it out, not even after the answers were given, because the important clues don't even exist in the story, like the Riddler's unexpected brain cancer or his connection to Thomas Elliot. And somehow it gets even worse when we learn the motivations of the other villains, most of whom apparently joined the plan just for money. I would have thought Clayface would be thrilled to play different characters, but he did it just for the money. I would have thought the Joker agreed to be a part of it to see Batman break his rule and kill him, but apparently all he wanted was a laugh at the Jason Todd gag, which he wasn't even there to witness. I would have thought the Huntress was looking for the thing that she wanted the most, Batman's approval by saving him in Crime Alley, but apparently she just wanted money for a new bike and a new outfit. And the Riddler? Well, he did it all just to brag to Batman that he had figured out he is Bruce Wayne. Jeff Loeb really set out to turn the Riddler into a dangerous enemy with this impossibly contrived scheme, but by explaining his motivations and how he won't be any threat at all, the Riddler becomes the most pathetic Batman villain. Ironically, the Riddler is Jeff Loeb's favorite Batman villain, as no other enemy gets so much attention in his stories. In The Long Halloween and Dark Victory, the Riddler gets preferential treatment above the other villains. And a couple of years after Hush, the Riddler becomes the biggest winner when he makes out with a partially naked Selina Kyle in a story where he is once again the main villain and at the same time the biggest loser. For all intents and purposes, Batman Hush is a Riddler story, the most popular and the worst, because it ignores his pathological need to create riddles, which is an essential part of the character, and yet the Riddler keeps the themes of Hush consistent, because after all, he was the evil mastermind hidden in plain sight. That's why it's hard to analyze Hush objectively, because when the story is smart, it's brilliant, but when it is bad, it's beyond awful. The ending is a perfect example of this, as keeping the body of Jason Todd missing was genius, leaving a massive door open for the future and accomplishing what this story originally wanted. But then the ending also breaks up Batman and Catwoman with a childish and dumb execution, which is almost universally hated. And I say almost because I don't hate it. Because for most of the story, Batman was acting strange, emotional, unfocused, out of character. This was one of Batman's darkest chapters, with him losing control of his emotions, his thoughts, and being psychologically manipulated, toyed with. Now Batman needs to find his center again, so that if he should ever fall in love, it should not be under these circumstances. Despite the dumb execution, I like this ending, because these are characters with backgrounds, motivations, and personalities, not playthings for fanfiction. Looking back at Batman Hush, I find it easy to forgive the many things that people don't. The usual criticism the story gets is that it's overrated, nothing more than empty spectacle with Batman jumping from one epic fight to another. And while there is a degree of truth to that, it ignores the many awesome qualities of the story, which go beyond just nice art. The attention to detail, the consistency of themes and pacing, and the exploration of the relationships in the Batman mythos are all elements where Hush exceeds expectations. It's the reason why Hush works perfectly as an introduction to the Batman comics for new readers, providing an excellent overview of the history, the characters, the tropes, the relationships and dynamics of the stories. This was the storyline that put Batman back on top, dominating the sales figures of the comic book industry for a whole year, as every Batman fan became invested in the mystery, coming up with theories about the identity of the new villain, while enjoying the fantastic art and expecting with bated breath the release of each new chapter. In the early 2000s, Batman fans were starved for good, interesting Batman stories with great art, worthy of the most popular DC character, and Hush came along to provide just that, an epic mystery that had the potential of becoming the best Batman story of all time. And although it failed, Hush still managed to become one of the most popular Batman stories ever, even though it is far from perfect. The many flaws of the story are self-evident, and the harshest critics always blame the writing, forgetting that it was DC Comics who wanted a new villain, forcing this lame enemy into the story and ruining everything. Because if Hush didn't exist, the story would be perfect. There would be no unnecessary childhood flashbacks. The Riddler would have figured out Bruce's identity by himself, instead of getting into a Lazarus pit because of a convenient brain cancer. Instead of Elliot being shot at the opera, it could have been Selina, justifying Batman's reaction against the Joker. Instead of Elliot operating on Bruce, it could have been Chandra, as that was apparently the original plan. Harvey Dent wouldn't have gotten his plastic surgery, which was pointless anyways, because they did nothing with the character after this huge change, and Harvey eventually went back to being Two-Face anyways. Jason Todd's return would have been perfect. And most importantly, without Hush, Harold doesn't die. And I bring this up because to me this is a crucial moment, because Hush actually marks the end of an era, the end of the classic era of Batman, where characterization, art and storytelling were consistent, the era of important stories about the history and evolution of the character, stories that had serious consequences and lasting, permanent outcomes, stories where the villains working together made sense and were deadly serious, the era where continuity mattered and all the comics and sagas connected seamlessly in a unified vision for Batman. The death of Harold represents the end of that era, as the undeniable commercial success of Batman Hush changed everything, and DC Comics learned all the wrong lessons from it. Hush opened the doors to a new age for Batman, one where continuity is ignored or conveniently used to create shocking moments, an era where the classic enemies are nothing more than pawns in bigger schemes, an era where not even death is final, and the comics are disconnected and inconsistent, as each new writer comes up with their own different vision of Batman, while the art becomes less about sequential storytelling and more about awesome splash pages to make everything work. This was the dawn of a new chapter in the Batman comics, and for better or worse, this is the toxic legacy of Batman Hush, a story with a broken plot and a broken Batman who can't even stop the bad guys and has to be constantly saved by his friends to the very end, and yet it's still among the most popular stories ever. This is why so many people can't stand Hush, because even against all odds, it manages to succeed and entertain, providing one of the most fun experiences in the Batman comics and becoming an instant classic that I think everyone should read, at least once. This is a truly enjoyable story with great art and enormous potential that unfortunately fell short of becoming a masterpiece, instead becoming one of the most divisive and significant moments in the history of Batman. Now the mystery has been solved. This is what Hush did to Batman, and the only thing left to say is that I like pineapple on pizza. The Return of Hush is a story that happened shortly after Batman Hush, and it explains what happened to Tommy Elliot. And if you'd like to know my thoughts about that story, then head over to my Patreon, where I post weekly reviews about the Batman comics I read on a regular basis, and the latest review is all about The Return of Hush. And on that note, a big thanks to John Papp, Walt Scaler Batman, Thomas Mori, Caronade, Kay, Agent Meister, Ivan B. Parker, Javier Rodriguez Camacho, and all of my patrons. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.